Well, welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I'm Jim. I'm joined today by Aaron. And Aaron, it is your first time with Draft Professors. Thank you for coming on the podcast. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Jim, for having me on. Big fan of your Twitter feed and some of your content. So I know I've tagged you in a few things over the last few months. Appreciate you retweeting some of my stuff, and thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. I am, as I've hosted this podcast for 3 years, I've got to learn a lot about, let's say, the NFL as an industry. Learned about the players, the scouting. I am intrigued to learn about the agent side of things. Everything from, how players find you or you find players to negotiating. And I will definitely give you a shout out as well on Twitter, because I actually learned a lot from your thread today. I think you had 11 different points for players. Right? It was 11.
Yeah, it was. I recommend anybody who's got a son or nephew or just a friend that's getting into that might be an NFL prospect next year, just to follow me and take a look at what I posted. I'm going to try to post more of that kind of content in the summer. Whether or not you end up hiring me as your agent, I don't care, but I want you to be educated about the process and what agents do and how to set yourself up for success.
Yeah. So I guess at this time of year as an agent, and if we're looking ahead to the 2026 draft, that's going to happen in about 11 and a half months. What kind of things are you doing? And what does your process as an agent look like?
Yeah. This next year will be a lot different for me than this year. So this year is my first year as an agent. I'll give you a little bit about my background too. So I'm the only active duty military NFL agent. I'm currently on active duty in the Air Force. And that presented me with some challenges. And it's also hard being a first agent because you get your certification kind of late October. And by that time frame, most of the top 300 guys are really taken. So unless you work for a big agency or you have a family member or a friend that's going to be in the draft class, you're at a disadvantage just based on the timing of everything. Most top prospects get kind of inundated with agents reaching out to them in the August, September timeframe. So this year, I was just being a new agent, new to the industry. I knew I was going to be getting out of the military at some point, and I always, I'm at the point in my life, been a lawyer for 10 years, where I was trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. And I've always been a big football fan and grew up a diehard Packer fan. I'm a Packer shareholder, and I want to do something fun. So I just kicked around the ideas of what I want to do, and it kept coming back to being an NFL agent. And they allow you to take the agent test once a year. It's always in the summer. So I started studying on my own. I didn't know there was prep classes you could take or that stuff. So I just went into a testing center and passed the test. And then I had the chance I'll give Neil Stratton a shout out. InsideTheLeague.com has a really great first year agent program. You pay a couple $100 and you get access to a bunch of materials and Zoom sessions and get to meet former GMs and stuff. So I did that program and really just kind of figured it out as I was going along. I'm not going to say this first year was perfect, but it worked out better than I thought it would. So I got one player that was a undrafted signee named Trey Washington, who's the starting safety at Ole Miss. So he signed with the Colts after the draft this weekend. And then I have another player, Jordan Wright, who's a cornerback from UConn, who's got a couple rookie minicamp invites. I had about 15 clients this year. It was a lot. It was probably more than I intended. And I found them through social media. I know you're asking me what I'm going to do this year. I'm going to try less on social media and more on in-person meetups, and I'm also going to try to leverage my current clients to give me referrals to some of their teammates, former teammates. That's really how you succeed as an agent, is through your current clients vouching for you to their buddies and teammates. So I'm going to leverage that. I've already had, my Ole Miss guys trying to help me out. I have a home in Oxford, Mississippi, so I'm going to, find some in-person ways to meet up with guys too. This summer, I'll start looking at prospects, just try to get a sense for who I think is going to be on an uptrend. So I'll be looking at seniors mostly, maybe some juniors that I know are high level. But me as an agent, first year, now second year agent, I can't really focus on guys that are first round, second round prospects. I can get into that a little bit, but you have to have really deep pockets to get those guys. And we're talking 6 figures of cash that you have to offer them to sign with you. And I don't have that level of resources being a military person. So it's, I have to find the lesser known prospects and cultivate that relationship.
Okay. And so from let's say an evaluation standpoint, how do you figure out, okay, so let's say you want to focus on players, we'll say 75 to 300.
Yeah.
Where do you get your assessments from that the
Sure.
player is likely going to be draftable, or they're going to be somewhere, let's say between 300 and 450 on the board, which is likely a UDFA? Like, how do you get that assessment?
So this year, I'll give you an insight into my strategy, and anyone can steal this. I'm trying to help out other young agents that are trying to get into the industry. There is something called the NFS Blesto list. I'm sure some of your listeners are aware of these lists. So you have these services that the pro teams work together on to come up with about 300, 400 names of guys that they've decided are potentially going to be draft quality prospects. So this year I found like a leaked version of that on the internet, and I took a look at it and I was like, I'm not going to get any of these guys. So I'm going to need to find people that are not on this list. So what I did was, just being an Ole Miss fan, I looked at the guys who weren't on that list who I knew were good, and used my own fan knowledge to be like, okay, these are the 5 guys on Ole Miss's team that I'm going to try to cultivate some kind of a connection with. I also used PFF grades for a lot of guys. Okay. And I would use social media outlets too, like yourself and other pundits, just trying to get a sense for who are they talking about as, having a good start to the season that wasn't on those lists. And by and large, what I would try to do is send them messages on social media or try to find out, ways to get their contact information. I also have access to an address lookup service. So I sent a couple handwritten letters to players too. None of that panned out, but I thought that was a nice touch. I was trying to send a letter to their parents or themselves and explain who I am and why I would like to work with them. So this year, I'm going to do more of my own scouting. I also have, just through this year, I built up a couple of relationships with current NFL scouts that I know will, maybe give me a tip here or there, guys that are under the radar, guys that are 3 draft prospects that I can then try to make a connection with this summer.
Okay. And for me, like this is actually the most exciting time of the year, right? So literally the player board that we have at Draft Professors right now is about 224 players deep.
Okay.
And what that means is that at least one of the 70 podcasters here has watched the player and said, I like them. Right? We haven't vetted that somebody likes somebody, but they might like them for one reason or another that may or may not make them draftable. But that list right now is 224. And by mid-July, we're going to be up to 350 or 400. Okay. At least one of the draft professors already has a 300-person board. Okay. Meaning he's watched at least 2 games of 300 people.
Wow.
Kind of thing. So this is the most exciting time of year because it's that preliminary board. And then by the end of August, we will have compared our boards to people outside draft professors. Like, we'll bring them on the podcast, say, like, here's our 50 defensive linemen. Do you have a defensive lineman that's ranked higher than any of these 50?
Okay.
That kind of thing. Trying to see if, did we miss a player? Because, like, we'll always miss a Carson Schlesinger, right? Because he didn't start playing a lot until his senior year. But I'm running a draft simulator, so I have to make sure that I have a reasonable player list in it.
Yeah.
So the entire podcast, let's say, lineup is designed to, hey, do we have the right players? And the podcasters here are tremendous at making sure that they have a reasonable player list. So I think that you and I are trying to do the same thing for very different monetary reasons.
Yeah. No, I think one of the things that I kind of knew going into this, but this year has confirmed it for me, is that you don't need to have a formal scouting background to spot talent. I know that there's a lot of people on social media that'll be like, oh, well, this person on ESPN doesn't know what they're talking about. They've never been a scout. Or this person has no idea, they never played in the NFL. And I think anybody at home, if you've watched football your whole life, if you, generally understand how, offensive or defensive schemes work, and, if you just have an interest in fantasy football, you can start to realize which guys I think can play at the next level. So I just wanted to spell that. I think there's no, you don't get a PhD in scouting. There's no credential that you need to do to be a scout. So people who are sitting on their couch, or people who, have a blog, can absolutely spot talent early on, just as well as I think some of these scouts do.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think the people that are watching film, whether you're an NFL scout, whether you're doing the draft as a hobby, or you're hoping to get into the industry, my opinion is we can probably find gems that, let's say, the national media doesn't talk about. And I actually thought day 3 coverage of the draft on the networks was like bad or awful, because they weren't talking about the players. They wanted to talk about Shadur Sanders falling or whatever. But it's like, this is the biggest moment of the life for 257 players.
I know. I felt like that whole fiasco did a disservice to the guys that were getting drafted on day 3, who, you'd see 7 names fly by before they even mentioned somebody. And that's tough when, it's your biggest moment in your life and you're just a name on the screen because of the ongoing media coverage of this fiasco. So I feel for those guys.
Yeah. And I definitely want to give a shout out. I was watching the Bootleg Sports draft feed. That was where I was getting my day 3, because I literally had to turn the TV off.
Yeah.
I couldn't listen to it. And they were able to talk about, I can't say they talked about every player. They talked about most.
Sure.
And I think there were probably, 100 feeds on day 1, but there's only about 7 or 10 of them on day 3. Because not everybody has the depth of knowledge to go 257 players deep. So, So, on your Twitter thread today, I have a couple questions. What is the amount of contact between a college player and NFL scout? As far as I think there was something about, ask a scout what you need to work on, or ask a coach what you need to work on. How much contact is there between a college player and an NFL scout?
Yeah, so I think it varies based on the level of the talent of the player, and also how engaged the player wants to be with the scouts. my client, Trey Washington, for example, one of the scouts told me that he talked to him like pregame and at a practice during the season and really liked his personality and liked how smart he was. So I don't know how long those conversations were. They get just kind of being around the practices and watching the games and getting to walk through the locker room as to what guys are like. I had a scout tell me that he went to a practice and one of the highly rated prospects was kind of messing around and not taking it seriously and taking reps off, and that was a red flag to him. So they do get to engage with these guys a little bit, and that's what I put in the thread, though, that they know who the scouts are that come to their practices. Scouts aren't trying to hide that they're a scout. They're wearing their team's logos all over their clothes, and they get all this free merchandise from the team, and their whole wardrobe becomes that they work for that team. So if you're a player and you see, I don't know, just if you see a Bills logo on a guy and he's standing there staring at you, he's probably a scout. Go up and introduce yourself. Just say, hey, this is this is where I've been playing. This is the position I play. I don't know if you got a chance to see me today, but if you did, I'd love to get feedback. And I guarantee you the scouts will be super impressed that you had the courage to come up and talk to them. Because I'm sure a lot of college football players just ignore them and go about their business. But if you're trying to get drafted, the entire 3 or 4 years of your college experience is one big job interview. And a lot of guys don't view it that way. They kind of view it as, I can figure out the draft when I'm up for, my eligibility runs out, or when I'm finally getting some kind of, attention from NFL teams. But, you should view it as a 4-year long way to impress scouts.
Yeah. And I like the Senior Bowl advertises themselves as it's the start of the draft process. It's a long job interview. And I think that's a good sales pitch for the Senior Bowl. But to your point, there was a lot that happened the 4 months before the Senior Bowl.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
Even just to get invited to the Senior Bowl, there was a job interview for the Senior Bowl.
And they, even to get on the watch list this fall, you had to have done something to stand out as a sophomore or junior. So you have to, do things that make you get, the Shrine Bowl or the Senior Bowl to notice you and put you on those watch lists. It's not just how good you are in the field. Sometimes it's, how many followers you have on social media, how nice you are to scouts. Because they build those watch lists in part from, intel they get fed by scouts, or there's a lot of circular logic to those lists. So it doesn't start just at the Senior Bowl. It starts 2 years before that.
And from, I guess, where you sit as an agent, and how do I want to phrase this? If you're looking at a player and you need to, let's say, steer them, do you sign with Buffalo or do you sign with Jacksonville? Like if they're a UDFA.
Yeah.
How do you, do you think it's usually like the signing bonus? Do you think it's, can I make the roster? Like, where do you think that decision?
It's
like,
a
how
mix.
do you frame it to a client, or how do the players ask you?
Yeah. This year with one of my clients, we had about 15 teams reach out before the draft. And it's, if your client's going to go undrafted, it becomes almost like a recruiting process. So I can say that the teams that my client was most interested in were the ones that spent the time to do a Zoom call with him, or to get him on the phone with a position coach. I think that relationship is important to me and to the player, to feel like they really want this guy and they're going to take care of him if they bring him into the facility. There are other teams that, just sent a text message to my guy and said, "Hey, we really like you. Hope you're, considering us." But then we don't hear anything for a month. So those teams that did that, it was nice to know that they were interested, and it made my client feel good. But the teams that did the multiple calls, that talked to him about how they see him fitting into their scheme, really trying to sell him, those teams stood out to us. And then it's also about making sure that what they're telling us lines up with what their actions are. So if you tell me that my guy is really high on your list of day 3 guys, and but then you take his position in the 7th round, and while we're talking maybe about him signing with you, that basically to me ruins the momentum for your team to then sign my client. And so we were watching round 7 pretty closely to see if if teams were drafting guys at our players' positions and still gonna have a need there, and if I thought my player could still make a roster. So the signing bonus thing to me isn't as important. Maybe so if you have a PFA client, you're talking about like a $25,000 signing bonus and maybe $200,000 in guarantees, which is a lot of money. But if you're not a PFA, if you're like a UDFA that's maybe not on those lists, you're talking about maybe $5,000 to $15,000 in a signing, either 0 money guaranteed or maybe mid 5 figures. And that kind of money, it really pales in comparison to making a practice squad or getting a minimum deal as a first year player on a team. So we're never going to make career altering decisions over $5,000. That's not important. So even if a team comes in with 15,000 and another comes with 10,000, but the $10,000 signing bonus team has a real big need at his position, we're going to take the $10,000 signing bonus.
Yeah, and I like how you put like the team need at the position, because I think you said one of your clients was a safety that signed with the Colts, correct?
Yeah.
And I knew that safety was actually a big need for the Colts going into the draft. So even if they drafted one, injuries happen, they might want to keep 2. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I'm really happy that he ended up on the Colts, because I see a lot of opportunity there, where there was other teams offering more money, but they drafted a safety that has similar skill set to my guy, so we weren't as interested in those teams.
And one of the observations, it's difficult for me to track. I can track up for Buffalo because that's my team, right? Just keeping track of 69 players, 53 on the roster plus 16 practice squad. That's more than enough for my brain.
Yeah.
Buffalo has a history of, if you're on the practice squad year 1, you're frequent. It has happened more than once that by year 3, they're on the active roster. Meaning that they had to spend either 1 or 2 years on the practice squad, but then they secured a spot on the 53. And I don't know what that trend is league-wide, right? Because I think the report that I've seen the league send out is, here are the undrafted free agents which made the 53. And that's all it lists. But it doesn't show the timeliness. Like, well, if you look a year out, we had UDFAs from 2023 make the roster in 2024.
Yeah, if somebody has that report, send it to me. The NFLPA this year sent all the agents a really helpful spreadsheet that showed the number of UDFAs per team, how many of those guys made it to a practice squad, how many made it to the 53-man for week 1, and then what were some of the breakdowns on finances. That was huge for me, because I don't have the resources to generate that report on my own. So thank you, NFLPA, for putting that together for us, because that drove a lot of decisions.
Well, and I have a theory along the lines of, if you're undrafted as a player, find a team that has players at your position that are over the age of 30. Because those are the players that will get injured more often. So even if you don't make the roster coming out of camp, there's a higher probability that they're at least going to need to do a game day call for the week.
I agree.
Kind of
we
thing.
looked at that's what I looked at too, was do they have a guy in the over 30 that's starting? Do they have a guy in the last year of his rookie contract that might not still be there? Do they have guys that they signed as like on futures contracts that I can tell aren't really going to make the roster? So those are the things I was looking at for where I wanted my clients to sign. And then sometimes you got one option, so that makes it easy too.
Yeah. So I'm looking at your thread from earlier today. So again, we have definitely a few people listening. If you haven't seen Aaron's Twitter feed, he had a really good 11-post thread on what players should be doing. So can you talk a little bit about NIL and because I think your 11th one was something to the effect of you can be, as an agent, you can be involved with NIL. Mm-hmm. And how is that different than being an agent for a player in the NFL? Like, is it a different certification, or can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, you see a lot of bigger agencies now getting into this. Like you look at Drew Rosenhaus, he'll sign, 5-star prospects or guys that he knows are going to be first-round draft picks next year to NIL representation deals. And, I think their agency typically helps with like some marketing contracts and reviews that stuff for them, or they'll help negotiate the NIL collective deals for their guys that they kind of have in that development system. And it's a really smart way to build up a relationship with somebody that, it's a year or 2 year long investment to build those relationships. But then when it comes time for them to be eligible for the draft, I don't think players are can abandon their NIL agent who they have trusted and really like on a personal level for another NFL agent if their NIL agent is certified. So that's something that I'm trying to better cultivate. There's no NIL certification process, but you have to register with the states where you're trying to sign players. And so there's a state-by-state licensing process. So some states don't have any process, and then some have, like Mississippi, where I have one of my state registrations. I had to pay $500 and submit references, and they do some kind of minimal background check to make sure I'm not, convicted of fraud and things like that. But it's just smart. The days of NFL agents quietly talking to players and, pretending like they're not trying to represent them in their final year, those are gone now. They just sign these NIL representation agreements.
Okay. Okay, and then one of your favorite, or my favorite thing, was on post 11, and it said, "Don't take money from sketchy people in the industry."
Yeah.
So if you had to tell a player what is sketchy behavior,
yeah.
What kind of things do you see that you would consider sketchy?
So there are a lot of what we call runners or middlemen that are not agents, but they are very friendly with lots of agents. And what they have a knack for is, they go to kids' high school games, they go to college games, they meet your mom at the game, and they, market themselves as recruiting consultants or whatever the fancy title they want to give themselves. But basically what they do is they do a lot of the legwork for some of these other agents, like big name agents. And how they get paid is they basically sell the kids to agencies. So they'll promise you all kinds of things about how they have all these connections with big name agents that you've heard, and they can get you a meeting with them. And you sometimes even they'll give you money up front to use their services, and then how they get paid on the back end from the big agents that are willing to do that kind of thing. There's a bunch of these people that are kind of famous for doing this, and some of them have even been convicted criminally for doing this kind of behavior, basically acting as an unlicensed agent. So if anyone's talking to you about your agent representation and you Google them and they're not an NFLPA registered agent that doesn't have a certification, you should probably run. To me, is a big red flag. If they're promising you money or if they're giving you money up front and they're not an agent, run from those people too. If you ever want a sanity check on this, you're welcome to DM me. I don't even have to represent you. But tell me, hey, Bob is telling my mom he's going to give her 50 grand to help me find an agent, top name, or even if they don't give you money up front, they're going to get a kickback from an agent and basically sell you to an agency. Just feel free to shoot me a message and I'll tell you whether or not it's legit or if it's sketchy.
Cool. So is there anything else about being an agent that you'd want to share with our audience, or, you have maybe a funny story or anything that you'd want to share?
I guess we can talk about the sketchiness a little bit more. I was at an all-star game, and I won't mention the name of the person, but sitting in the lobby waiting for one of my clients to get done showering so we can go out to dinner. And this individual approaches me and starts just getting to know me a little bit. And, I have an hour to kill and I'm waiting for my guy to come down. So I'll just talk to this stranger and see what he's got going on. And I didn't know at the time he was one of those runner middlemen I was talking about. And he starts talking to me and asking me, how I'm doing in my first year and how my recruiting going. And I tell him about some of my guys, and he quickly kind of insults me. It's like, oh, those guys they're never going to make the league, which made me feel great. And then he proceeds to tell me, like, you need to work with somebody like me who can bring you in guys. I have all these relationships with, he just starts name dropping all kinds of big prospects this year for the draft. And then he tries to sell me. He's like, for 35 grand, I'll sell you a first round draft pick. I'm like, okay. He's like, no questions asked. You give me 35 grand, this kid will sign with you. And then he starts to, basically we spend the next hour of him showing me all kinds of crazy text messages on his phone with different high profile names in the industry and all of the weird shenanigans that he pulls off that I won't get into. But that was really my first welcome to the industry moment where I'm like, okay, this is how some people operate. I don't operate that way. I don't have the resources. I like to think I don't have that kind of character. But I mean, a lot of the rumors you hear about the industry, I think, are true. There is a lot of stuff that happens in the shadows. And, to me, it's funny now looking back on it, but it was kind of shocking in the moment to realize that some of these, adults that they make a living off of just meeting kids and selling the world to their parents and then selling these kids to agents.
Yeah. So I guess I can picture it, right? But I'm probably picturing it more from the Hollywood standpoint, right? With maybe things that I've seen in movies or whatever. For me, it's fascinating both to hear your stories, to hear what some players are communicating. There is one other, let's say, draft podcast where I know that Ryan Talbot of Draft Diamonds has players that contact him without agents all the time.
Yeah.
For example, right? So players are looking for an agent and they don't know, I guess, how to find an NFL certified agent. So
yeah,
how real is that for, let's say, the players that are 200 to 400 on the board? Like, how are they taught how to find an agent?
That was one of the shocking things to me, was how poorly these college programs prepare these kids for the life after college football. I guess I always thought that they were teaching them, the drills that they're going to run at pro days, or that they're talking about how to manage your money or how to find an agent. But that type of education really doesn't get taught to them formally. Some of the schools try to do a good job of, like Ole Miss, for example, which I'm familiar with. They let agents register formally with the school for no cost, and then you can submit like marketing materials. And so they give a list of pre-vetted agents who've all submitted the correct paperwork to show that they're legit to the players. And then let players come and read the marketing materials and sift through it and figure out which ones they want to reach out to. I don't think very many schools do that, unless you're talking about a P4 kind of conference. So yeah, it's a lot of these players, it's either their parents helping them figure this out, or they're figuring it out on their own on how to hire an agent. It might be the first time they've ever, spoken to somebody that runs.
I think you just went on mute. Can you hear me?
All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, that's better. Yes.
Okay.
You went out there
Sorry.
for like a minute. No, that's all right.
So yeah, it was surprising to me how many of these guys are just figuring out, sending me DMs. I can't tell you how many messages I got on social media, especially from D3, D2, FCS guys, just begging me to represent them. And, I wish there was a better way to go about it, but that is what it is for now.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm looking through your thread to see anything.
I saw a message. I think I saw a message in the chat asking me what criteria I look for signing a player.
Yeah, from Steve. Yeah. He's one of the draft professors.
Yeah. So I'll give you what criteria I use this year and then which ones I'm going to use next year. My first year was sort of a combination of me reaching out to players that I knew played FBS, started in the FBS, in states that I was looking to represent people. So my business is going to be based out of Mississippi. So I'm heavily focused on Ole Miss and Mississippi State. And then I'm also somewhat interested in a lot of the FCS schools too. So like Jackson State, Alcorn State. So I really just tried to focus on those players that had any kind of, national recognition. For next year, I'm going to be more selective with who I bring in. So I'm only going to really sign guys that are at the FBS level, have at least 12 starts across their career, guys who don't have a history of injuries, because that's another big issue. No character issues in terms of like arrests or being suspended from the team. And then I have to make sure they're size appropriate next year. I did maybe a little bit of a bad job this year with that. So making sure that they're the right height, the right weight for their position at the NFL level. Because if you sign a guy and he's 5 inches shorter than the NFL, expectation for a certain position, you're doing yourself a disservice. They can be the most talented player in the world, but the NFL has pretty strict cutoff lines for what size they're willing to take. And then to me, I'm going to do a better job of educating my players as soon as they sign on how to get their bodies ready for the process of a pro day, because, a playing weight or a playing conditioning is different than the type of conditioning and strength coach work you have to do to get drafted. So earlier on in the process, I'm going to work with my guys and let them know, hey, you're 10 pounds overweight or you're 10 pounds underweight. This is what you need to get to before your pro day. So start working on it. And so I wouldn't say my criteria are going to be as, more strict, but I'm going to do a better job of getting those players to fit the criteria I'm looking for.
Okay. So you raised actually a good question. So you said you don't want a player with an injury history. And I think a lot of players try to make sure that, let's say if they had an injury in high school, that it's not public necessarily. How do you determine, like, from an agent's perspective, whether or not they have an injury history? What are you using as your source?
So I think that's where starts come into play. So if they've consistently started, they might have a small injury here or there, but to me, that kind of dispels any concern about the injuries. But if they took a full year off for torn ACL and then they come back and they only start 3 games, that's going to be a red flag for me. There's always those guys who are 4-star, 5-star prospects out of high school who just can't seem to get healthy or can't start consistently. I'm going to steer clear from those types of prospects because you can have all the physical skills in the world, but if you can't stay on the field, it's going to be very difficult to stay in the NFL.
Okay. And do you do background checks, or how do you, what kind of things are you doing to flag players for character as an agent?
Yeah. Next year so I have a background check software I can use that I'm going to run, especially on any guys that I'm going to put money into. And then there's always public stories about guys, getting suspended from a team for this reason, or so I'm going to try to use a lot of those public sources too, because you might not see in a background check that a guy got suspended for fighting at practice or testing positive for a drug or something during a routine drug testing. So I'm just going to do a better job in general of Googling the guys and seeing what press coverage there is on them, or also talking to some of the scouts that I trust to give me some of that inside knowledge, because NFL scouts know everything about you. If you've been kicked off a team and you got in the transfer portal and went somewhere else, they know why. They've talked to people about why you left. They have evidence. Like, it's pretty impressive the work that NFL teams do on these guys.
So it's interesting that you're doing the same process that we are. Yeah. Right? 'Cause like when we're doing the scouting reports on the players, we're Googling them. We're trying to figure out what can we, do we know what their height and weight is? That's, we have to start there, and you go to 3 different websites and there's 3 different numbers.
Yeah.
Right. But then we're still looking for, did they get kicked off of the team, or if they went into the portal, why did they leave their original team? Because a lot of times that's actually not known. We just know that they entered the portal. But knowing the why from like where we stand and like ranking them on the board, that actually affects their ranking. If like, did they get kicked off the team, or did they just enter the portal because they see a better opportunity? They want to leave Big 12 and go to the SEC, right? I mean, that makes sense to go from the Big 12 to the SEC, but if you're going from one school or one program to another, why?
Yeah. I'm going to do, yeah. I think I'm going to have a hard rule too. Yeah. That if they enter the transfer portal more than twice, I'm going to pass. And then also, like you're saying, if they've transferred down or they've transferred, laterally in a way that doesn't add up, then that's going to be a red flag for me too.
Okay. So Brian is a draft professor.
Okay.
And he is one of the best with measurements. He has a database where he keeps the measurements. So Brian, I know I'm going to see you on a podcast again in a couple of weeks, but I love this question. So where do you get measurements from those 2 agencies?
So you can buy that information. I didn't have the resources to go out and buy some of that information. So yeah, I assigned guys that on their team website list at a certain height or weight that they were nowhere near that. So I'm going to do a better job of trying to verify that stuff this year.
So if you need a source to verify it, I'd like to recommend Brian.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. I'll hit you up and get some info from you.
So I'm looking to see if Brian has retweeted the podcast already.
Okay,
so
great.
You'll be able to find Brian on X. He's a draft professor. He's been with us from the start. He generally podcasts on either Saturdays or Sundays.
Okay.
But Brian keeps an extensive database.
Wow.
And he could tell you about players that are 2 years away from being draft eligible. He already has measurements on some of them.
Wow.
They're not confirmed, but he's got a database. And I see, Brian, you gave me the thumbs up. Brian, you know that you're one of my guys. So I appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, there's so many great resources on social media. And that's why I follow accounts like yours, Jim. And, I'm always just looking for data. I'll take data anywhere I can get it. And, I just think the more information you have, the easier it is to make a decision. So thanks for what you guys do. And posting that kind of stuff on social media.
And I mean, I'm obviously selling Brian hard, but there's another 74 people podcasting on this channel.
Sure.
Some of them use Brian's database, and some are just going out and trying to collect the info any way that they can. So I can definitely say, like, if you're looking for measurements, feel free to reach out.
Okay.
We've got like a group chat that all of us are communicating in about players and where do you have this guy ranked and what school did he transfer to. All sorts of draft topics are in our group chat.
All right. I love it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on the podcast, is simply because I think we can help each other.
Yeah. No,
right?
I'm all about, growing my own practice alongside, other people that are just trying to dabble in this. I don't know if I'll ever be a full-time agent. I don't, I have my own other aspirations, and I always view this more as a hobby that I would like to take off, but if it doesn't, I'll always do it part-time. But that's why I love hobbyist people like you and your professors, because we all love football. We love, our teams, or we love our college teams. And this is a fun way to live a part of that industry and feel like you're involved in the process. And, I think, especially me as a young agent, I want to educate people. That was one of the main reasons I became an agent, was I wanted to shed light on the industry and try to root out some of the bad apples. And so I'll continue to, communicate with you guys, and hopefully we can work together on, lifting up this industry.
Absolutely. So, I don't have any more questions for you.
Yeah.
Is there any questions that either you have for me or the draft professors, or anything else you want to chat about?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think I really want to emphasize how tough this is to find the day 3 guys, and how I think you all help feed into that data. I think if you watch some of these ESPN blogs, or if you're tapped into some of the mainstream, the bigger media, maybe it makes it seem like the 300 guys are locked, set in stone. These are the 300 guys, and I can tell you that the bottom 150 of that list is anyone's guess. So this process, I learned that I had, several teams telling me that, different guys of mine had draft grades and they could easily go, and then they don't. And so that's why this is very much an art. It's not a science. And because of that, I think it's fun to see how the process plays out. It's also, for better, for worse, there's a lot of hype involved in how prospects, where they go. Yeah, I like it. Top 175.
So I'm going to give Newt a shout out. So he's another draft professor. So when I was recruiting people to join the podcast group, I said, your board has to be 175 deep. and this is to your point that you just made, right? Because I didn't say top 175 out loud. Newt heard what you said, and he immediately thought the same thing I did. So ultimately, Newt, and Newt's a Packers fan, by the way.
Nice. Go Pack.
Brian is a Packers fan, by the way. So if I have Newt, Brian, and Steve each giving me their top 175 player boards.
Yeah.
What I can pretty much assure you is that I'm going to have a list of about 275 to 300 players. Because to your point, once you get beyond the top 125, rankings begin to get significantly skewed.
Oh, yeah.
To the point where what somebody likes as player 150, somebody else says he's not even draftable. And that's where we learn more about each other as far as like, what do you value when you evaluate a player, or what schemes does the player fit, and things of that nature. So anybody that podcasts with Draft Professor, they'll have a board that's 175 deep.
Okay.
And then Brian threw another question into the chat. Have you had any dealings with Green Bay?
I did this year, yeah. So I grew up a Packer fan. I'm a Packer shareholder. My dad's from Milwaukee. I grew up in California, but spent a lot of time in Wisconsin. And I was 5 years old when they won the Super Bowl with Brett Favre. So it really left an imprint on my life, and on my what fan I was going to be of what team. And when I first became an agent, I was like, I need to put aside my own personal biases. I don't care about any team over another as long as it's what's best for my player. But I would be lying if I said that when the Packers called me up and were wanting to talk about my guy, it definitely got me my heart racing a little bit, a little more excited. I thought that they were going to sign one of my guys this year. There was a lot of talk kind of before the draft and then into the draft. And I was really excited. I'm like, I hope he signs with the Packers. I hope it happens. But they ended up drafting a safety, I think, in the 7th round. And that kind of shut down my opportunities to continue negotiating with them. But it wasn't from a lack of interest or trying on my part. I was very excited about just talking to them. They have a really good scouting department. Really impressed by. They send their scouting assistants in particular out to like every event. I kept seeing the same faces at any event I would go to. I was at the HBCU Legacy Bowl this year. I was one of the few agents that went to it, and the Packers had like 3 scouts there, which I was really impressed by. So just shout out to Green Bay. I think they do things the right way. There's also, I came to find out that I liked some of the other franchises a lot too. The Seahawks in particular, I found to be really great to communicate with. 49ers too were awesome to communicate with. Cardinals, Colts, just really impressed by the teams that have scouts that are willing to pick up the phone and call me as a first-year agent and get to know me and ask me about my players and spend time with me. And that really impressed me too and made me want to send my player to them. So those are the big teams probably that talked to me during this draft cycle.
Okay. You don't need to address this comment out loud.
I actually had good interactions with the Jets too. They took one of my players for a local day for their team, and they were super professional and responsive as well. There's some teams, I won't name names, but you send emails or you text their scouts, or I try to give them a call, they'll never answer. It just goes into a black hole, and that's frustrating as an agent, but I'm sure they go about things in their own way.
So you mentioned the HBCU Legacy Bowl, and one of the other people that's involved with Draft Professors, his name is Bill Carroll.
Okay.
Bill has also retweeted the podcast.
Nice.
Bill does a lot of work with HBCU. So if you want to learn more about those players ahead of time,
okay,
he would be the number one resource I would give you for HBCU.
Okay, great.
So I am more than happy to take the Draft Professor Network, and if you're looking for this niche or that niche, there are people that specialize in different things.
Okay, nice. Yeah,
I know, like, I was supposed to be on Bill's podcast before this, but apparently wires got crossed, and I never got the actual link to join the podcast. But Bill's been on this channel several times, and then several people from Draft Professors have been on his channel as well. So he's definitely a really good gentleman to know. You would definitely bump into him in Mobile, and you would definitely bump into him at the Combine as well.
That's great. Yeah, I love the networking opportunities from this.
Yeah,
I signed a couple HBCU guys, and I signed one from the game, Traquan Thomas, who was the defensive MVP. He had 4 sacks. I thought the Lions were going to maybe sign him after the draft, but kind of fell through. So I'm hoping he ends up in the CFL. But it was a great game. Really impressed by the how professional it was, run and everything. So
cool. Well, we have been going for close to an hour. So do you have any parting words for the Draft Professor audience that's out there before we close this thing down?
Yeah, just want to say thanks for having me on. It's been nice to engage with your community and all the folks out there who are doing the draft analysis that you're doing. Feel free to make it a two-way communication. Anyone can reach out to me, DM me. My phone number is on my profile. It's my actual cell phone number, so you're free to text me, call me. Happy to hear your thoughts on a guy or ask me questions about the industry. But thanks again for having me.
Well, Aaron, it's definitely been a pleasure. So as Draft Professors, at the end of August, we're going to have what we call our scouting report list. That's our list of approximately 300 players that we're going to be doing deep dives for podcasts on starting from October all the way through January. So when we get that list, and that's a conglomerate list that about 40 people are contributing to.
Wow.
Saying like, I like this player and stuff like that, right? When we get that list, I will make sure that you have it. It will be published on Twitter as well.
Okay.
But I will make sure that you get that list, definitely. We're more than happy to have you on the channel again.
Yeah.
Just, as the draft season evolves. But
yeah, sure. Bring me on in the fall, and I can get in more in depth about what guys should be looking at when they're hiring an agent. And we can cover other topics too. Absolutely. So for the 75 podcasters at the Draft Professor, for Aaron from the Stronghold Sports Agency, myself at the Draft Professors, thanks for watching, everybody, and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow.